Hey, this is Doc Yates. I'm a naturopathic doctor, registered acupuncturist, and a kinesiologist, owner of the Yates Naturopathic Clinic, and the founder of the interactive health website, Able Health. And this is the Simply Health Podcast, a show for females where I work to simplify and demystify the secrets of achieving optimal health naturally, based on my own experience in working with thousands of female patients over the past 15 years of my clinical practice. Welcome to Simply Health. Hey, this is Doc Yates, and on the Simply Health Podcast today I want to talk about the dangers of putting all of your eggs or all of your diagnosis into one basket. And what do I mean by this? I'm talking about the problems I see when I have clients come in and they have a variety. They have one major health condition, and then it's assumed by all the other practitioners working with them that all of any symptom they get from that point on is therefore related to that major health condition. And because there's nothing they can do about the major health condition, therefore there's nothing they can do about the symptoms, so the patient is left basically to suffer. So this is so frequently not the case. There's many of the symptoms that do come up that are, though they might be commonly under the heading of those health conditions, in those situations, they have nothing to do with it. So let me give an example. When I first got my clinic, I basically spent all the savings that we had to buy this building so I could open my first clinic. And the building was zoned, or I should say the land was zoned commercial, and I was almost ready to open, and all of a sudden the building inspector comes by and he's like, okay. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to open. And everything's zoned commercial, so we're good to go. And he's like, well, actually, the property is zoned commercial, but the building isn't. And I was like, well, what's the difference? And he said, well, you have to bring everything up in this old bungalow to commercial code if you're going to open a practice. And I was like, oh, I just spent everything I had on purchasing this old bungalow. So he gave me a number for a designer to come in to tell me how much it would cost. And at that point, the designer quoted well over $100,000, which I didn't have. So I was like, okay, well, I will have to do all of this myself. So I would work in the small room that I was renting out when I first opened practice in another building during the day. And then evenings and weekends, I was working in doing these renovations. But the one renovation that I wouldn't do is mudding drywall, because if you mess it up, no matter how good everything else does, it looks terrible. So I had a drywall mudder come in, and he was coming in, and all of a sudden he started coming in later and later and not always showing up on time. And one day he didn't show up at all. So when I saw him the next day, I could see that he was hurting, like he was clearly in pain. So I asked him, how you, let's say his name was John. I don't want to use his real name. I was like, John, what's up? Like, you didn't come in yesterday, and, I can see you're clearly hurting. Like, is everything okay? Do you want me to do any work for you? And he was like, no, there's nothing you can do. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but you mind telling me about what's going on? He's like, I have a condition called syringomyelia. And what that is there's a cyst in my spinal cord, and it's in my neck. And he's like, that cyst puts pressure on this is what my doctor told me. The cyst puts pressure on my nerves, and it leads to numbness and weakness and chronic pain, and I'm going to basically have to deal with this for the rest of my life. And I was like, oh, that sounds terrible. I was like, but there's no harm in no harm in trying, to see if we can do anything about it. So I took John to the one room that we did have finished, and I put him on the acupuncture table and did some acupuncture on him. And immediately after, he had quite a bit of improvement. I was like, well, looks promising. I had him back the next day, and I did the same thing, and all the pain that he was struggling with was gone. So the point of this story is not that, acupuncture cures everything, or, that I knew something that anyone else didn't. The point is that if it was assumed by everyone else because of this condition, and because that pain was a classic sign of that condition, that therefore there was nothing anyone could do about it, so no one even tried. So his pain was gone within 2 treatments. Now, he still had syringomyelia. He still had his cyst affecting his nerve. He still had to have that monitored. He'd still have weakness in his arms. But but he didn't have pain. So that one thing, his quality of life was better. He could get more work done, and he was self-employed, so like he had to work. Like there was no sick days when you're self-employed. So that is an example where you can't just assume that every symptom that you're dealing with is related to one thing. Another example, I had a patient who we'll call Jane, and unfortunately Jane had, not unfortunately saw a chiropractor. The unfortunate thing is that she had a bad reaction to a chiropractic adjustment of her neck, and she had a stroke. So the adjustment of her neck led to a tear within her vertebral artery, which caused her to have a stroke. And she's, well, I'm going to say young because she's my age. She's like early 40s. So this was devastating. Like, she has young kids to take care of. She had a job. She could no longer really take care of them. She couldn't go to work anymore. She has chronic daily head pains, nausea, dizziness, weakness, sensitivity to light, sound. Almost imagine like a stroke in combination with the symptoms of the worst possible concussion, and then all of that lasting for months and months and months. So her mom was telling me about it, and I said, well, why don't you bring her in and we'll see if we can do anything about it. And it took a long time to get her to come in. She finally came in, told me everything, and then she told me about these other symptoms that she had that seemed very inflammatory in nature, things that didn't seem related to the headaches and to the stroke from the adjustment. So it took some convincing, but I convinced her to do an anti-inflammatory diet. And then I said, let me do some acupuncture as well. So we're going to focus on diet and acupuncture. Those are the only two things. First week, nothing. Second week, mild improvement. By the third week, no more headaches. Well, at least 80% less headaches. So her headaches had drastically reduced in intensity and in frequency. She didn't get headaches now from bright lights, and so the main symptom, like her pain and headaches, at this point were no longer related to the stroke. And again, same situation. There's nothing I did that any naturopath or acupuncturist wouldn't have done. The thing is that from the practitioners that were working with her, nobody tried to do anything. And because no one tried to do anything, you can't get results from doing nothing. You can't just watch and wait and just hope things are going to get better. So, another example. So, how would that apply to you? Like, there's a lot of times where, people are like, well, you have these mood issues, it's because you're depressed. So, there's nothing we can do because that's what you have. You are depressed. And it's like, well, maybe you might want to look at that from a different angle. Or maybe you have pain and someone's like, well, it's because you had this injury and there's nothing you can do about it because it's an old injury and it's a rotator cuff, so therefore you're stuck with rotator cuff injuries for the rest of your life. Or a classic one, there's nothing we can do about this because it's age related. It's just part of aging, so just accept it. And what I'm saying is, I don't want to be putting in like false hope saying, oh, any one of these symptoms are going to be corrected, because again, the Jane still had the issues from the stroke. She would still get dizzy if she overworked herself. And John still had numbness and tingling. They still had the major conditions. But even if you could alleviate 10% of the symptoms that you're dealing with, someone said no, you could do nothing about, would that be worth it? Like, what if it was 50 or 75 or 80%? Would that be worth it? It would definitely be worth it. So my saying is, don't put all your symptoms or your eggs in one basket and leave no stone unturned when you're dealing with your health. So I hope you enjoyed the ramble today, just while I was on my drive home from work. And this is Doc Yates signing off. Thanks for tuning in to Simply Health. If you want to learn more about health, check out Able Health. If you want to see some of the other projects that I've been working on in health, business, music, and life, please check out the links below.